Hi, welcome to the lecture on Chapter 11, Part 1. This chapter is kind of a culmination of everything that we've covered this semester. So we're going to look at a couple of different areas. This week I'm going to look at network design and network security. And then next week we'll look at basic network performance and troubleshooting. Probably the troubleshooting part is probably the reason I chose to split this lecture into two parts. So let's look at network design, some of the key features you need to think about when you're designing a network. Slide my photo out of the way. Now, typically what we're doing in this class is looking only at the small office configuration, but some of these same things apply both for small and larger networks. So usually a small network basically has what? I got one router, maybe one or more switches, that I may have IP phones, I may have different computers, desktops, laptops, and basically what I need to do is have a router that has access to a wide area network connection, whether it's DSL, cable, Ethernet, out to the internet. So managing this small network is similar to managing logarithms because I'll have to maintain it, I'll have to troubleshoot if things happen, got to work about securing devices and information in the network. Now, some of the things you need to consider as far as device selections is how much money do I have? I mean, based on cost of a switch and router depends on capacity, features you want, the speeds, the types of ports. I mean, we've dealt with lab sessions that have fast Ethernet, gigabit Ethernet. We've talked about fiber. All of this stuff is things you need to consider as far as the type of device you're going to buy. How much do you think the business is going to grow? How many additional ports do I need or devices do I need to handle this? And then also some of the features that would be there. Do you need quality of service, voice over IP, layer 3 switching, DHCP? So all of those things can come into play. Now, the one thing I know you guys hated was the IPv4 address designing a network. But guess what? Since every device in your office needs to have an IP address, you need to design that. So you need to understand the types of end devices, what servers are going to be there, what peripheral devices are going to be there. Are there going to be any intermediary devices in there? So you need to come up with an IP addressing scheme that addresses all of this stuff. And I think Chapter 8, we went through how to break down an IP address, how to design an IP address scheme. So that's one of the things that you've got to make sure you deal with in designing of this network. Now, the other thing you got to pay attention to is redundancy. I mean, even though you're a small business, can I afford to have a server go out? Can I afford to have a router go out? What happens if an internet provider goes out? So you need to look at those different aspects. In this figure, you see different servers, redundant links, redundant switches, redundant routers. All of this boils down to what's the importance. How much time can I afford to be down and out in this business if I lose a device? Now, one of the other things you need to worry about is what kind of traffic am I going to handle? And what priority do I give it? Did the devices I purchase allow me to give different data priorities? Or did I buy something so old because I got it cheap that doesn't allow me to give voice and video high priority because what? I'm running UDP? So because there's not a lot of administrative on that, I may want to make sure that that is a very high priority. I may give my email medium, but I want to make sure you've got to decide which of these priorities you're going to set up on your network classifications. Now, there are definitely different applications that you want to do. There are two basic forms. There are network application and then application services. Now, network applications are software programs used to communicate over the network. Email clients, web browsers. So you got to decide what email service you're going to provide, what web browsers you're going to provide. And then you're going to say, from an application services, am I going to offer file transfers? Am I going to offer network printing? Or is each individual in the office going to have their own printer? So those are applications you need to consider because it applies to traffic, it applies to network traffic, the different services, what priority application you're going to give. So those are things that you need to figure out as you're building out this network. Some of the services that you can provide, you got DNS, secure shell, email server, DHCP, web servers, FTP servers. All of these need to be in consideration as you're designing your network. What types of messages you're going to send? What's the syntax you're going to send? How often? So all of these things need to be taken care of as you're designing your network. Now, it's becoming big as far as voice and video. Because we're using a lot of IP phones. How many of you have charter phones or something that had voice over IP as your home phone? It's becoming big. But you need to understand those applications. You need to understand that. Is there going to be video? Are you going to be uploading video or conferencing between remote offices or clients? So you need to understand how much of that network is going to be voice or video over the internet. Now, there are definitely, as we've seen, some applications, some IP telephony, voice over IP, but you also got some real-time applications. So there are a couple of different protocols out there. If I want to make sure that I get very responsive support applications that I can't handle a lot of delay. So there's two protocols, real-time transport protocol and real-time transport control protocol help reply. We haven't covered a lot of those, but as a business planning your business, you need to make sure if I have some real-time applications that I can't have delay, I may want to investigate those protocols. Now, the other question becomes, I'm a small company now, but how much do I want to grow? How much do I anticipate to grow? Because now you say, okay, as I'm planning my IP addressing scheme, I got to make sure I've included that growth. I don't want to have to, my business has grown by 2 users and now I got to come up with a whole new IP address scheme. Very painful. But if you plan and leave a little bit of growth, maybe you're going to use CIDR and allow a couple of subnets for growth. So those are things you think of. Other things that people don't think about is documentation of the network, both physical and logical. Inventory, who's connected to what? What's my budget? How much has been itemized, for IT? Understanding traffic patterns, what protocols, applications are being used. Did I buy something I didn't need? Or just analyze it. Gee, if I hadn't bought this package or this protocol, I could have done other things with my network. So these are things that you need to think about designing your network and as it grows. Now, one of the things as your network grows is I've got to analyze my traffic. What is my traffic flow? Well, there are protocol analyzers out there that can be used to help you identify where your traffic, where's it coming from, where's it going, what times of the day are my peaks and valleys. So it helps me to plan future growth and maybe manage my day-to-day traffic more effectively. Now, great. I've planned some of this stuff, but how are my employees going to run this? How are they going to, what kind of PCs do they have? But I also got to understand how this network is changing, how my employees are changing based on the job as it goes through. There are definitely different tools that can be used to take a snapshot of how a particular employee, whether it's application services, operating system, what times of the day are they running, how much CPU are they using, how much of their disk drives, how much memory are they using. All of these are network utilization that you need to, as an IT diviner, need to take into consideration. Now, the second thing we need to do is, how do I deal with security? Now, there are definitely 4 types of threats and vulnerabilities in most networks. 1, there's stealing information. 2, it's, either data loss, people delete data, or manipulate it. Identity theft, maybe disrupt access to my network, disrupt the service. So we need to keep all those things under consideration. It's definitely essential because of how much we definitely are relying upon our networks and our computers in every aspect. Now, what we want to make sure is we don't get any unauthorized person intruding into our network and causing an outage, because the results can be devastating to the business, cost money, time and money in a lot of cases. So there are 4 types of threats that occur, like I mentioned. Information threat occurs, somebody breaks in for the purpose of stealing confidential information. Data loss and manipulation is breaking into a computer to destroy or alter the data, reformat a hard drive, damage a piece of items. Identity theft, theft where personal information is stolen, someone's identity. Disruption of service, preventing legitimate users into your network, accessing, the network. So those are 4 things. Now, how do I start putting some security in place? Well, 1, I got to make sure I've got a physical security plan. How do I prevent people from physically accessing equipment? Whether it's, if you look at the school's security system, you can't get back to the server without going through 1, 2, 3 doors, and one of them's got a key. At least it's key coded. So, but there are 4 categories that you must deal with. 1 is the hardware. What happens if the hardware had physical damage? Some things I got to worry about is environmental. I got to make sure that it's too hot, too cold. The humidity is controlled. Electrical threats. I got to make sure that there's no spikes in power, no loss of power. What happens if power goes out? And then, of course, is how do I maintain it? How do I handle replacing things? Making sure I don't have static discharge, or not having critical spare parts, or parts aren't labeled correctly, where you think you're putting into server 1 and it's actually server 2, or I can't trace a cable back to an individual computer on the floor. All of these things need to be taken into consideration as far as the physical side of it is. Now, types of vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities is a degree of weakness in the network, and it can be routers, switchers, desktops, security devices. Typically, it's servers and desktops that are usually under attack. The three primary ones are technology, configuration, and a lack of a security policy. So maybe the technology one is I'm stuck on an old protocol or an old operating system that has a security weakness. Configuration is I've got unsecured system accounts or passwords that are easy guessed. Security policy is I don't have a written policy as far as how I'm going to monitor and maintain network and its resources. So those are kind of the types of vulnerabilities that come into play. Now, network attacks, there's several different types. Now, one type is malware. And basically, it's just malicious software coded as designed to damage, disrupt, steal networks and hosts. Or there's viruses, worms, or Trojan horses. Viruses are a type of malware that it's an executable file, but it's propagated by insert a copy to itself into or becoming part of another program, and it spreads from computer to computer. Worms are similar devices, but don't require a host program. So worms can kind of stand alone as they travel through the network. The third one is a Trojan horse, and that's where users are typically tricked into loading a software, which then would execute this malware on the system that just got loaded. So usually it'll create a backdoor to get system in, getting access to it. Now, in addition to malicious code attacks, there are different types of categories that attack the network. One, it's reconnaissance attack. It's kind of trying to discover and map out your system. Two, it's an access attack. I mean, it's an unauthorized manipulation of data or system access. Or you get the denial of service, which means I'm going to do something that would prevent people from getting into your system. Now, a reconnaissance attack, hacker could use either NSLOOKUP or WHOIS to determine the IP address. But also, once they have an IP address, they can use fping, which would then give me a ping of ranges of IP and see who's responding. Once they know an address, they can use Nmap to see which ports are listening. So there's a lot of different tools out there that people can use to watch what's going on. Now, access attacks definitely start exploiting vulnerabilities of certain services, whether it's authentication services, FTP services, web services, and there are 4 different types of those kind of attacks. You got password attacks where I'm trying to method of guessing password, whether it's a brute force, a Trojan horse program, packet sniffers, which I'm just watching the line to see if I pick up a password, trust exploitation. Attacker can get access to the system by taking advantage of a trust relationship between two parties. Port redirection, where it says, hey, I installed software that I'm going to start directing traffic to a different port than it was anticipated. Or take that a little bit further and do man in the middle, which says, I'm going to insert myself in the path where it says, I'm going to redirect the port, get it, gather whatever information I want, and continue to send it on its way so you don't even know it's happening, but I'm gathering information on the side. Now, one of the other network attacks is definitely denial of service, DOS. Basically, it does is it prevents authorized people from getting access to your service. Some of the examples of DOS is ping of death, where an attacker sends a very large ping packet, either quantity of pings or size of pings. So if you go into your ping and look at the manual pages, you can set quantity. Right now, when you do a ping, you get, 4 responses in a very short packet size. But what happens if I say I want to ping, but I want to do 1 million pings and I want to send a large packet to the network? Becomes, now I got to deal with all those requests. Or the other one is SYN flood, where I'm sending multiple requests, synchronization requests to a web server, and I have no way of responding to the three-way handshake because I'm getting a flood of SYN requests that I just can't keep up with. So those are a couple of denial of service attacks that come into play. A couple others here is you got DDoS, where it says, hey, I'll use intermediary hosts called zombies to launch my attack. And you see a lot of that. Some of the largest security threats have been they hacked into baby monitors and be able to deny service, and they were starting to send SYN requests to get access to a device. Or it could be a Smurf attack, where it's an ICMP-based attack where the attacker broadcasts a large number of ICMP packets to an IP address. So these are just some types of denial of service. Now, I think the lab I gave you is actually trying to investigate some ping request, some different security threats. So just take a look at it and go from there. I don't think I gave you any backup homework, but how do I mitigate traffic? Well, I can make sure I back up my system. I make sure I can keep my updates, upgrade my software, update it, put the patches in, upgrade new pieces of software as they become available. So all of these things come into play to make sure to help mitigate. Another thing is I want to make sure how do I authenticate? So I want to do AAA mitigation. So I want to make sure that I can authenticate who you are, authorize it, and keep track of who is on it and account for it. So this 3-way of tracking, and it's usually a third-party service that you're paying that's going to do a lot of this information for you. I can set up firewalls to help mitigate attacks. Firewalls are great tools to protect from external threats. So firewalls can reside between 2 or more networks, but firewalls can also have different techniques for defending what's allowed or not. You can packet filter it. I can allow only from certain IP or MAC addresses. Maybe I can only allow certain applications to be run. Or I can say I'll filter only certain URLs. I'll only allow allow certain access to certain websites. Or I can do a stateful packet inspection. So incoming packets, I'm depending on, and I'm checking if they're legitimate responses to a request that was made from someone inside the network. So it's double checking, is this a response to somebody actually asking for information? The other thing is I can double check on the endpoints, on the hosts that people have. How are they secure? So laptops, desktops, servers, smartphones. So as long as you got a well-documented security policy, what's allowed, but it's got to say, hey, I'm allowing you to bring your home devices in, but you must have the following antivirus software, intrusion policies. Another one says, hey, how am I locking down? How am I shutting down services that aren't being used? How do I lock it down? How do I, because on a router, when you first bring it up, it comes up what? Nothing's installed. But I want to make sure that as I do this, as I bring routers up, I want to make sure that things are in place. Now, Cisco's got an auto secure feature that allows them to help lockdown devices that aren't being used. You want to make sure that all the default usernames and passwords should be changed. So we all know that every system you get comes with those. You want to make sure that access to those systems, when you dial in remotely to a device, you want to make sure that it only, they're restricted to only those who need it. And of course, if you've got services running that aren't necessary, shut them down. Passwords. We all know strong passwords are crucial in preventing security. So you want to make sure you set up a policy that says, hey, how big a password's got to be, what's included in a matrix, password, how complex does it have to be, how often does it have to change. Of course, we want to make sure we don't write them down. We want to make sure that, so one of the policies is you've got to make sure that that's done. Now, some of the best security passwords, I've got to make sure that I can encrypt my passwords so there's no passwords, so if somebody did get access, they couldn't see what our passwords into our routers and networks. I can use the security passwords min length to make sure that the length of the password's correct. I want to make sure that I can say I want to block login after so many attempts within a certain amount of time. So there are commands that do that. The login block for, boom, tells me I can block login. So there's definitely device securities on switches and routers that you can put in place. It can be an exec timeout, disconnect users if they've been idle for so long. I can enable, secure shell. So I'm not trying to telnet into devices. So I can only get access to devices when I want. So those are some of the things as far as you need to think about as far as designing a network or putting security on a network as you design it. Next week, we'll look at network performance and troubleshooting. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.